One second, she was just trying to escape a persistent creep at a crowded gala. The next, her lips were pressed against a stranger in a perfectly tailored suit. She thought it was a harmless distraction. She didn't know she had just kissed the city's most ruthless mafia boss, or that he would be the one to finally uncover the secret her father had spent 20 years burying. The Luminary Gala at the Whitmore Historic was supposed to be Vivian Chase's first real night in the world. At 26, Vivian was a junior financial auditor at a mid-tier firm, and landing an invitation to the city's most exclusive charity event felt like proof she had actually escaped. For most of her life, that would have been unthinkable. Her father, Arthur Chase, had raised her almost entirely behind the walls of a gated property outside the city. No sleepovers, no school dances, no unsupervised friendships, phone calls monitored, curfews enforced even at 22. He called it caution. He called it love. Vivian had spent years calling it nothing at all, because questioning it only made the walls close tighter. He homeschooled her through most of her teenage years after a scare he never fully explained, moved them twice without warning, and installed enough security cameras around their house that Vivian used to joke, without much humor, that she'd grown up on television. He died 14 months ago, quietly, of a heart that had been failing for longer than he'd admitted. And for the first time in her life, Vivian had nothing keeping her inside four walls. She sold the house, took the auditing job, rented a cramped apartment with paper-thin insulation, and told herself that normal, unremarkable independence was its own kind of miracle. She still flinched at loud noises. She still didn't know how to make small talk at a party without her pulse climbing, but she was here, in a borrowed emerald silk gown, nursing a single glass of champagne for over an hour, trying to look like a woman who had done this 100 times before. It was supposed to be a night of polite handshakes and business cards. Instead, it turned into a nightmare the moment Trent walked in. Trent was a senior partner at a rival firm who had spent the last 3 months refusing to accept that Vivian wasn't interested. Tonight, the open bar had emboldened him. For 45 minutes he shadowed her through the ballroom, his hand repeatedly finding the small of her back, his whiskey-soaked breath hot against her neck. Vivian had no practiced way to shut a man like that down. She'd never had to learn one. Desperate to lose him, she slipped through a set of heavy mahogany doors, leaving the chandeliers and the string quartet behind. She found herself in a dim, private corridor reserved for the hotel's VIPs. Thick carpet swallowed the sound of her heels, but she could still hear Trent's uneven footsteps pushing through the doors behind her. "Viv, come on," Trent slurred, his voice echoing down the narrow space. "Stop playing hard to get." Panic flared in her chest. The old, familiar kind, the kind that used to come when she heard her father's key turn twice in the lock instead of once. The corridor was a dead end, terminating at a set of guarded double doors. Standing directly in front of them was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, filling out a bespoke charcoal suit. He was half turned away, speaking in a low, authoritative murmur to a massive guard in a trench coat. Trent's footsteps were getting closer. Vivian's mind raced, adrenaline hijacking every ounce of common sense, honed by 20 years of not being allowed to make her own decisions. Just this once, she needed to make one fast. She needed Trent gone. She needed a shield. Without thinking, she lunged forward, grabbed the lapels of the stranger's suit, spun him around, and pressed her lips against his. For a fraction of a second, the man went completely rigid, like a statue carved from ice. Vivian squeezed her eyes shut, praying he'd play along. To her shock, he didn't push her away. Instead, a large, calloused hand came up to cradle the back of her neck, fingers threading into her updo. His mouth took control of the kiss with a devastating, dominant intensity. He tasted of expensive scotch, dark tobacco, and something inherently dangerous. When Vivian finally broke away, gasping, the world around her had frozen. Trent stood 10 feet off, all color drained from his face, and he wasn't looking at Vivian. He was staring at the man she was clinging to, jaw slack with pure terror. He stumbled backward, nearly tripped over his own feet, and sprinted back into the ballroom. Vivian exhaled in shaky relief. "Thank you," she whispered, stepping back. "I'm so sorry. He wouldn't leave me alone, and I just..." Her words died in her throat. The dim light shifted, illuminating the stranger's face. Brutally handsome, aristocratic bone structure, eyes the color of a winter sky, cold and entirely without mercy. Faint silvery scar cut across his left jaw. It wasn't just him. 3 other men had materialized from the shadows, everyone with a silenced pistol drawn and aimed at Vivian's chest. "Hold," the stranger commanded. His voice was a low, gravel baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floor. Instantly the weapons lowered. Though the men stayed tense, eyes locked on her like wolves cornering a deer, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief, dabbing a smudge of coral lipstick from the corner of his mouth, eyes never leaving hers. "Do you make a habit of throwing yourself at strange men in dark hallways?" I made a mistake," Vivian stammered, every survival instinct screaming at her to run. "I'm sorry. Have a good night." She didn't wait for an answer. She hiked up the skirt of her gown and bolted, bursting through a side exit into the freezing night. She didn't stop running until she was locked inside her cramped apartment, telling herself it was just a bizarre run-in with an arrogant billionaire and his overzealous security. She was wrong. The next morning, Vivian sat in her kitchen, hands trembling over her laptop. Her best friend had texted an urgent link to an underground news blog. Syndicate boss surfaces at Luminary Gala. Below the headline sat a blurry photograph of the man she'd kissed. His name was Lucian Vane, 32 years old, undisputed head of the Vane crime syndicate. The docks, the underground casinos, a money laundering network stretching across 3 states. The article detailed his ruthless rise, noting he'd personally overseen the violent dismantling of a rival faction just 6 months earlier. He was a ghost, a myth, a man who ordered executions over morning espresso, and Vivian had grabbed him by the lapels and kissed him senseless. She slammed the laptop shut, cold sweat breaking across her forehead. She was nobody, a girl who'd spent most of her life behind a locked gate, who still sometimes forgot how ordinary conversations were supposed to go. Surely a man like Lucian Vane wouldn't care about a random panicked woman at a party. He'd forget her. But in Lucian Vane's world, nothing was ever forgotten. And everything had a price. For 3 days, Vivian existed in a state of suffocating paranoia, flinching at idling cars, her stomach nodding every time the office phone rang. By the 4th day, she began to relax. No one kicked down her door. Trent had conveniently transferred to his firm's overseas office overnight, a detail Vivian tried very hard not to think about. She convinced herself she'd slipped through the cracks. On Friday, a torrential downpour washed over the city. Vivian stayed late at the office, burying herself in spreadsheets to avoid the silence of her apartment. By the time she packed up, it was past 10. The building was deserted, the cubicles cast in deep shadow. She rode the elevator down to the underground garage, fluorescent lights buzzing, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the concrete. Her heels sounded too loud. As she approached her beat-up Civic, she froze. Parked diagonally across her exit path was a black Cadillac Escalade. Engine purring, windows heavily tinted. Vivian's keys bit into her palm. She turned to head back to the elevator, and a massive figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, blocking her path. The same trench-coated guard from the hallway. "Miss Chase," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a summons. The boss would like a word. The rear door of the Escalade clicked open. Vivian's legs felt like lead. Screaming would be useless. The garage was a tomb, and these men were professionals. Trembling, she walked toward the vehicle and looked inside. Lucian Vane sat in the plush leather seat, an open file folder on his lap. Dashboard light cut sharp shadows across his scarred jaw. He looked even more imposing than she remembered. "Get in," he said softly. Vivian obeyed. The door shut behind her with a heavy final thud, sealing her into a space that smelled of rich leather and smoky cologne. "Vivian Chase," Lucian read from the file without looking up. Then he paused. Actually paused, which she hadn't expected, and turned a page slower than the rest. Homeschooled from age 14. No listed employer, no listed address, until 14 months ago. Father, Arthur Chase, deceased. His eyes flicked up to hers, sharper now. "Before that, you don't exist anywhere, Miss Chase. No school records, no social accounts, no friends who post your photograph." A grown woman who spent the first 25 years of her life as a ghost inside her own father's house. He closed the folder halfway. "That's a strange kind of mundane." Vivian's face burned. It's not relevant." "Everything is relevant," Lucian said, "when I'm deciding whether to let you live." Her breath caught. "What do you want?" Lucian tossed a glossy photograph onto the seat beside her. Vivian looked down and gasped. A high-resolution shot of their kiss in the hallway. Passionate, desperate, entirely consensual. From the angle. "That photograph," Lucian said, voice deadly calm, "was taken by a man working for Dominic Farrow. Pharaoh runs the South Side faction. He's been looking for a weakness to exploit before he moves on my territory. You, Miss Chase, have just painted a target on your own back. As of yesterday morning, the underground believes you're my mistress. The blood drained from Vivian's face. No, you have to tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I'm nobody. You keep saying that, Lucian said, something unreadable moving across his face. Nobody. It's an odd word for a woman who spent 2 decades locked behind a security gate for reasons her own father never explained to her. How do you know that? Vivian's voice cracked. Because I had my people pull everything on you the moment your face ended up in Pharaoh's surveillance photos, Lucian said. And your father's name came back flagged in records that are 20 years old. Records that predate me. Records that belong to men who are all dead now, except one. Vivian's stomach turned to ice. What are you talking about? Lucian studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth a person could survive in one sitting. Your father wasn't just a private accountant who got overprotective after some vague scare, Vivian. 22 years ago, Arthur Chase kept the books for a man named Salvatore Ferro, Dominic's father. When Salvatore's organization collapsed in a war he started and lost, most of the men who could testify against what was left of the family disappeared. Arthur didn't disappear. He took his daughter and vanished into an ordinary life instead. He never spent a cent of what he must have known. He never sold what he knew. He just built a cage around you and called it a childhood. Because he was terrified that if anyone ever found you, they'd assume you had what he had. The ledgers, the routing numbers, the names. Vivian sat frozen, memories rearranging themselves in her mind at violent speed. The moves in the night. The cameras. The years of not being allowed to have a single friend who might ask too many questions about her father's job. She'd spent her whole life believing she'd been raised by a man who simply loved her too carefully. She had never once considered that she'd been raised by a man in hiding. He was protecting you, Lucian said, from exactly the kind of man who is now hunting you for an entirely different reason. Dominic doesn't just want leverage over me anymore, Vivian. Somewhere in that photograph, in that kiss, he found the daughter of the accountant his father spent the last years of his life trying to locate. He thinks you might still have what your father hid. Whether you do or not won't matter to him. He will take you. He will tear apart every box you own looking for those ledgers, and when he doesn't find them, he'll assume you're lying, and he'll leave you in the river all the same. A wave of nausea washed over Vivian. The sealed air of the Escalade felt suffocating. I don't have anything, she whispered. I sold the house. I gave away half of what was in it. I don't even know what he's talking about. I believe you, Lucian said, and something in the certainty of it steadied her. Strangely, more than any comfort could have. But belief isn't currency in my world. Perception is. And right now, Pharaoh believes 2 things that are both dangerous to you. That you're my woman, and that you're Arthur Chase's daughter. Either one gets you killed. Together, they make you the most valuable target in this city. Please, Vivian whispered, tears rising. How do I fix it? I'll leave town. I'll disappear like he did. Pharaoh has eyes at every airport and train station in this city. Run, and his men intercept you before you cross state lines. Lucian leaned forward, his presence swallowing the small space. There is exactly one way you survive this. Vivian stared at him, paralyzed. You lean into the lie, Lucian said smoothly. Pharaoh operates on leverage. He'll try to use you to draw me out, and he'll try to use your father's ghost to draw out records that don't exist anymore. I need a traitor in my ranks exposed, and Pharaoh is the key to finding him. You'll play the role of my devoted woman. You move into my estate tonight. You attend events on my arm. You smile. You hold my hand. You convince Dominic Pharaoh that you are the most precious thing in my life. Precious enough that going after either version of you costs him everything. You want me to be bait? Vivian breathed, horrified. I want you to be convincing, Lucian corrected. Play your part, and my men make sure no harm comes to you. We crush Pharaoh inside a month. Refuse. He let the silence stretch until it was unbearable. And I leave you in this garage, and Pharaoh's men have you before morning. It was a devil's bargain. Give herself over to a ruthless syndicate boss, or die at the hands of a rival cartel hunting a secret she hadn't even known she was carrying. Vivian looked at the photograph of the kiss, the single reckless moment that had cracked open a life she thought she finally understood. Then she looked at Lucian, reading the unwavering calculation behind his eyes. He wasn't asking her. He was giving her a choice in how she'd face her own doom, which, she realized with a strange, bitter clarity, was more choice than her father had ever given her. Okay, Vivian whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. I'll do it. Lucian's expression didn't soften, but something dangerous sparked behind his eyes. Good girl. He tapped the glass partition. Take us home. Emil. As the Escalade pulled out and merged into the rain-slicked streets, Vivian stared out the window. She was no longer a junior auditor, and she was no longer only her father's carefully hidden secret. She was the property of the Vane Syndicate now, stepping into a world soaked in blood with no way back. And as Lucian's warm, powerful hand closed over her trembling fingers, a rehearsal for watchful eyes, she realized the most terrifying part wasn't the danger. It was how, for the first time in her whole guarded life, someone had told her the truth about herself instead of deciding she didn't need to know it. The gates of the estate loomed like the entrance to a beautiful, terrifying fortress. Vivian stared through the tinted glass as heavy iron doors swung open onto a sprawling stone mansion ringed by manicured hedges and armed guards. She recognized the shape of it immediately, in a way that made her chest ache. High walls, cameras at every corner. A world built to keep people either out or in. She had grown up behind gates, just like these, except her father had called it love, and Lucian Vane didn't bother pretending it was anything but strategy. For the first 2 weeks, her existence was a masterclass in psychological whiplash. By day she was sequestered in a lavish guest suite, tended by a silent housekeeper named Nadia and a stylist named Petra. By night she was paraded through the city's underground. Private gallery openings, illicit casino nights, exclusive dinners behind unmarked doors. Every public moment was an immaculate performance. Lucian would pull her close by the waist, thumb tracing her hip, murmuring dark, meaningless phrases into her ear just to make her shiver, ensuring every onlooker believed they were madly in love. But the moment the car doors closed on the way home, the warmth vanished. He turned back to stone, tracking enemies in silence. You're fidgeting. Vivian, Lucian observed one evening in his dim study, pouring a glass of scotch with his back turned. I'm not a trained operative, Lucian, she snapped, frustration finally spilling over. Pharaoh's men were photographing us at the restaurant tonight. I can feel them watching me. I feel like I'm suffocating. He turned, gray eyes locking onto hers, and crossed the room slowly, stopping inches away. Fear is a liability, he murmured. Pharaoh feeds on it, if he smells your terror. He strikes. How am I supposed to pretend I belong in a world of blood and bullets? She demanded, looking up at him, heart hammering. I spent my whole life not being allowed to belong anywhere. My father made sure of that. Something shifted in Lucian's face. Not pity, which she wouldn't have tolerated, but a kind of recognition. Your father built you a cage because he was a coward who mistook control for protection, he said. I'm not going to pretend that's the same thing as what I'm asking of you. But you don't pretend to belong to the world, Vivian. You pretend to belong to me. When you're with me, no one touches you. Not Pharaoh, not the ghost your father left behind. You need to believe that. For a suspended moment, the air between them thickened. His touch wasn't a performance now. They were entirely alone. Vivian felt a treacherous flutter in her chest. The dangerous Mafia Don was supposed to terrify her. But all she could focus on was the protective heat radiating off him, and the strange fact that he was the first person in her life who had told her the truth about her own father, and let her decide what to do with it. Heavy footsteps broke the moment. Emil burst into the study, face grim. Boss, we have a problem. Lucian dropped his hand, instantly transforming back into the syndicate leader. What is it? It's Holt, Lucian's second-in-command for the Northside Territory. We intercepted a burner transmission. He's been feeding shipment schedules and security rotations to Pharaoh. He's the mole. Lucian's expression didn't change, but the temperature of the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Where is he right now? Running floor security for the underground diamond auction at the Sorrento tonight. Pharaoh's confirmed to attend. Perfect, Lucian said, a lethal calm settling over him. He turned to Vivian. Tell Petra to put you in the red dress. Tonight, we trap a rat. 30 minutes later, Petra pinned Vivian's dark hair into an elegant cascade and painted her lips deep crimson. The red dress was a masterpiece of danger. Plunging neckline, a slit that exposed a custom holster strapped to her thigh. Lucian had insisted she carry a small pearl-handled derringer, just in case, he'd whispered, sliding the cold metal against her skin with a gesture that felt overwhelmingly intimate. The ride to the Sorrento was silent, rain lashing the armored windows. Vivian studied the sharp, predatory set of Lucian's jaw. He was a man preparing for war. The Sorrento's penthouse was a glittering sea of corruption, Corrupt politicians and cartel bosses mingling beneath crystal chandeliers. Waiters weaving through bodyguards stuffed into bespoke tuxedos. The moment they entered, conversations hushed. Lucian placed a possessive hand at the small of Vivian's back, guiding her through the crowd. "Smile, Vivian," he murmured. "Show them you're untouchable." She forced a dazzling smile, leaning into his warmth. Across the room, near an illuminated display of raw diamonds, stood Dominic Farrow. Older, silver-haired, a cruel reptilian face. Beside him stood Holt, Lucian's trusted lieutenant. Farrow's eyes locked onto Vivian with a predatory gleam. He whispered something to Holt, who paled and nodded rapidly. The trap was set. But Vivian realized, with a jolt, they were walking straight into a monster's jaws. Lucian didn't hesitate, leading her directly into it, his stride measured and utterly without fear. The crowd parted for him instinctively. "Lucian," Farrow purred, spreading his hands in false warmth. "A pleasure, seeing you step out of the shadows. And who is this stunning creature? You've kept her hidden far too long." "Dominic," Lucian replied, flat and deadened, offering no hand. "This is Vivian, my fiancée." Vivian's breath caught at the word. A new addition to the script, designed to raise the stakes to a boil. Farrow's gaze slithered over her, making her skin crawl. "Charmed? It would be a tragedy if anything happened to such a beautiful investment." He tilted his head, something colder moving behind his smile. "Chase, was it? An unusual name to be sitting on your arm, Lucian. I wonder if the lady knows what her father used to keep in his desk drawer." Vivian's spine went rigid, but she kept her chin lifted, exactly the way Lucian had taught her. "The only tragedy tonight, Dominic," Lucian said quietly, "will be the sudden drop in your life expectancy if you finish that sentence." The silence that followed was deafening. Holt shifted, hand inching toward his jacket. Vivian felt her pulse hammering. She remembered Lucian's lesson in the study. She wasn't just bait anymore. She was part of the game. "Lucian," she purred, channeling every ounce of courage she had, trailing a finger down his lapel. "The air in here is stale. Perhaps Holt could fetch us some fresh champagne." She locked eyes with the traitor, gaze piercing and knowing. Holt froze, looking desperately toward Farrow. The dynamics of the room snapped violently. The Northside boss knew he'd been made. The air grew razor-thin, the opulence choked out in an instant. Vivian's demand hung between the men like a lit fuse. Holt's face strained of color, eyes darting between his current boss and the rival who'd bought his loyalty. Farrow's confident smile faltered. He recognized the shift on the board. Lucian didn't just suspect Holt. He was parading his knowledge in front of the city's criminal elite, daring Farrow to move. "Get the lady a drink, Holt," Lucian said, barely above a whisper. Yet it carried the weight of an executioner's axe. Holt stepped back, hand trembling over his jacket. "Lucian, I swear to God." "Save your breath." In a single chaotic heartbeat, the ballroom erupted. Holt panicked and drew his weapon, not on Lucian, knowing he couldn't beat the Don's reflexes, but on Vivian, wrenching her toward him as a shield. The red silk tore at her shoulder. "Nobody move!" Holt screamed. Screams echoed off marble as guests dropped to the floor. Crystal shattered. Emile and Lucian's men drew their weapons, but froze. Holt had his gun pressed to Vivian's temple. Lucian stood entirely still, his gray eyes blazing with something apocalyptic. It wasn't the look of a boss losing a strategic asset. It was the look of a man watching his world burn. "Let her go, Holt," Lucian said, calm, far more terrifying than a shout. "Release her now, and I only put 1 bullet in your skull instead of 10. "Farrow promised me the north side," Holt shouted, backing toward the service elevators, dragging her with him. "You're weak, Lucian. You let a woman soften you. You're unfit to rule." Farrow laughed from the safety of the diamond cases. "He's right, Lucian. He brought a civilian into a war zone. The daughter of a rat, no less. This is your kingdom crumbling in front of you." Vivian's heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird, the gun digging painfully into her temple. But looking at Lucian, the terror masked barely behind his rage, she understood the truth. The long nights, the protective touches, the heated glances in the dark. It hadn't been an act. He actually cared for her. And she, God help her, cared for this ruthless, broken man who was the first person to ever hand her the truth about her own life instead of locking it away for her own good. She wasn't going to die a helpless victim in a borrowed red dress, twice hidden, once by her father, once by a bullet. She remembered the derringer strapped to her thigh. Holt's grip on her was awkward. His attention split between Lucian's advancing men and the elevator behind him. Vivian sucked in a sharp breath and went entirely limp, dropping her full weight toward the floor. The unexpected dead weight caught Holt off guard. He stumbled, cursing, his grip slipping from her arm to her hair. In that split second, Vivian's fingers found the cold grip of the pistol beneath her slit skirt. She didn't hesitate. She aimed up and fired. The crack of the derringer was deafening. The bullet tore through Holt's shoulder, shattering his collarbone. He shrieked, dropping his weapon and falling backward onto the marble. Before he even hit the floor, Lucian was moving, closing the distance like a shadow, weapon drawn. He didn't fire at Holt. He fired at Dominic Farrow. The ballroom dissolved into a bloodbath. Gunfire shattered the chandeliers, plunging the room into strobing dark. Lucian grabbed Vivian by the waist and pulled her behind a heavy marble pillar as bullets chewed through the plaster above their heads. "Are you hit?" he yelled over the roar of gunfire, hands frantic as they checked her body, smearing Holt's blood across her red dress. "I'm fine. I'm okay," she gasped, dropping the empty derringer onto the carpet. Lucian pressed his forehead to hers in the dark, chest heaving. "You reckless, beautiful fool. You could have been killed." "You told me I belonged to you," Vivian fired back, grabbing the lapels of his suit. Just like the night they'd first met in that hotel corridor. "For the first time in my life, someone actually told me the truth, and let me decide what to do with it." I wasn't going to let him take that away from me, too. A heavy, intimate silence fell despite the gunfire still echoing on the other side of the pillar. Lucian stared down at her, the mask of the syndicate boss completely shattered. He leaned in and kissed her, not a performance for any audience this time. Desperate, bruising, tasting of gunpowder, adrenaline, and something like devotion. "Emil!" Lucian barked, breaking the kiss but keeping Vivian shielded. "Clear," Emil's gruff voice rang out. Lucian pulled her up. The penthouse was destroyed. Dominic Farrow lay dead near the shattered diamond cases. Holt bled out on the carpet, begging for mercy. Lucian didn't look at him as he fired one final shot. The war was over. Lucian holstered his weapon and looked at Vivian, his expression softening into something she'd never seen from him. Real vulnerability. "The threat is gone. My men will finish clearing Farrow's remaining people by morning. You're free, Vivian. Free of him. And free of whatever your father thought he was protecting you from. There's nothing left of it to find, and nothing left of it to fear." Vivian looked at the carnage around her, then at the man who had dragged her into hell only to hand her back the truth of her own life piece by piece. The truth her father had spent 20 years deciding she couldn't be trusted with. She stepped over the broken glass and wove her fingers through his. "I already told you." "Lucian," she whispered, wiping a smudge of dirt from his scarred jaw. "I'm not running. I spent 20 years locked behind a door I didn't choose. I'm done letting other people decide when I get to leave a room." Lucian Vane, the most feared mafia boss alive, smiled. He pulled her against his chest, arms closing around her as sirens began to wail in the distance. The girl who had spent her whole life hidden behind someone else's fear was gone. In her place stood a woman who had chosen, with her eyes wide open, exactly where she wanted to stand. If Vivian and Lucian's story had you holding your breath, smash that like button, drop a comment telling us what you think really happened to Arthur Chase's ledgers, and subscribe for more dangerous, secret-soaked mafia romance. Hit the notification bell so you never miss the next twist.